Let's talk about As You Like It. This play was probably written around 1599, almost at the exact same time that Julius Caesar was written, the other play that appears on this stage. And it's not a typical Shakespearean comedy. Shakespearean comedies, and I've talked about this too many times in past lectures, were derived from a classical model, from Latin and Roman drama. The playwrights Plautus and Terence, who Shakespeare would have studied in school. And the model that they used for a comedy was of a young couple that wanted to consummate their relationship, but was prevented from doing so by an authority figure or a law. And somehow, through comic chaos, they get around that authority figure and they end up engaged, married, or just in bed. And Shakespeare uses this in a lot of places, in a lot of his other plays, but not in this one. The other thing that's different about this play is the way the action unfolds. In a lot of Shakespeare comedies, and a lot of comic movies you might see, you have a beginning, a first act, say, in which the premises are set up. We're introduced to the characters, we get the basic idea, and then the middle action is the comic chaos. Right? We know who the characters are, let's send them into the woods, let's send them over here, let's put them at a party, crazy things happen, and then we resolve everything at the end. That's not how this play works. This play begins with an explosion of action. Act 1, you get a wrestling match, love at first sight, banishment, attempted murder, all in the first act. And then from Act 2 on, everything sort of just calms down. And the comedy of this play for the next 4 acts is not about chaos, it's not about weird coincidences, it's not about mistaken twins and things like that. Rather, it's about people, eccentric characters, some of them, meeting and talking, discussing love mainly. And when you're watching the play, notice how careful Shakespeare is to structure it so that a variety of the extreme characters all interact with each other at one point or another. So in a way, this is a play about different viewpoints coming together, and that's where the comedy arises from, not from chaos or slapstick. The final resolution of the play happens very quickly and seems almost arbitrary. It just sort of, boom, it happens. Why is this play so different from his other plays? Because he stole it. A man named Thomas Lodge, a contemporary, fascinating man, studied medicine, became a world traveler, went to Brazil in the 16th century, wanted to be a writer, wrote a book which was published in 1590 called Rosalind. And Shakespeare basically lifts the story from Thomas Lodge, even lifts some of the specific lines. So he follows the sort of pastoral drama of this novella that Thomas Lodge wrote and published in 1599. So I'm now going to give you sort of a brief summary of the play. The play is set in France. There's nothing French about it. He could have put it in Estonia. The only thing French about this play are the characters' names, and not even all of them. And some of those French names are mispronounced. So we have a very important character called Jacques, but it's pronounced Jacques. Why? Well, there is an ancient, venerable English tradition of mispronouncing foreign words whenever you can. Winston Churchill did not invent it. We have it here in Shakespeare. So, the story. It begins with 2 storylines in the first act. You have a man who's passed away, his name is Roland de Boys, leaving behind him 3 grown sons. Oliver, the oldest, a middle son who we barely see, and a younger son, Orlando. Now, there was a custom, and in some places it was a law back in the 16th century, called primogeniture. The idea was this: if a man dies, his title, his estates, his incomes all pass to the eldest son, just the eldest son. Those younger sons, well, they can join the military or the priesthood. grossly unfair. But personally, I've been advocating for it in my family for years because I think my younger brother would make an excellent priest. So, Roland du Bois was a smart man. He left a specification in his will that the older son, Oliver, should pay for the education and upbringing of the younger sons so they can make their way in life as a gentleman. He hasn't done this with the youngest son, Orlando. For reasons he doesn't even understand, he hates his youngest brother. And he says that, I don't know why, but I hate him. And so he has treated his younger brother as a servant rather than a brother, and has given him none of the estate, none of the wealth, has not allowed him to become educated and trained. The play begins with Oliver finally saying, that's it, I'm going to confront my brother about this. And he does physically confront his brother until finally Oliver says, okay, I'll give you some money, just get out of my hair. But of course, he's the evil brother, so he doesn't. Instead, he arranges for Orlando to be maimed or perhaps killed at a wrestling match that he's going to partake in later that day or the next day. And by the way, wrestling was really popular in the 16th century. Fairs would have wrestling matches, towns would have annual matches, and they wrestled at court. And this was not Hulk Hogan wrestling. Okay, this was not WWE. This was serious wrestling. People got hurt in these rings. So that's sort of the first storyline. The second storyline has to do with this dukedom in France. It's run by a guy called Duke Frederick. Perhaps as a rebellion against primogeniture, he has overthrown his elder brother, who is the rightful duke, Duke Signor. And Duke Signor and his followers have fled to the Forest of Arden. What a French place, the Forest of Arden. And we're told they live there like Robin Hood of England. When he fled, Duke Senior forgot one thing, his daughter. He's left behind Rosalind. Rosalind lives at the court with the daughter of Duke Frederick, Celia, and these two are best friends. This is one of the best depictions of female friendship in Shakespeare. They are BFFs. If they were alive today, they'd be getting matching tattoos and taking selfies all the time together and posting them on Instagram. So they're great friends. They go to the wrestling match, and Rosalind sees Orlando, Orlando sees Rosalind, and boom, love at first sight. Orlando is so overwhelmed, he becomes tongue-tied, he can't even speak to Rosalind. It's even more intense after Orlando unexpectedly wins the wrestling match. So everything's looking good. But then Duke Frederick, the evil Duke, finds out that our friend Orlando here is the son of Roland du Bois. Roland du Bois was a supporter of Duke Signor. Duke Frederick is not happy. Then Orlando finds out that his brother is probably plotting to kill him. So Orlando, with an old servant named Adam, says, that's it, we're out of here. We're going to the Forest of Arden to find Duke Signor. Duke Frederick then banishes, for no good reason, Rosalind. You're taking too much attention from my daughter. So he banishes her. What? Rosalind is upset. Celia is upset and says, well, if you're banished, I'm going with you. Okay? I can't leave. BFFs forever. All right, where are we going to go? We'll go to the woods. We'll find your father, Duke Signor. Why didn't she think of this 10 years ago? But of course, it's very unsafe for French noblewomen to travel in France, I guess. So Celia dresses as a commoner and changes her name to Aliana, which means stranger. And Rosalind, because she is uncommon tall, decides to dress as a man. All right, it's cross-dress. She dresses as a man, and then she calls herself Ganymede. Let's pause for a minute here. Ganymede is a mythological name. It's in Greek and in Greco-Roman myth. And in Greco-Roman myth, Ganymede was a very pretty shepherd boy who was carried up to Mount Olympus by Jove or Zeus to become his cupbearer and lover. So Ganymede is, in classical myth, sort of the patron saint of homoerotic male desire. It's a loaded name. Off they go, pretending to be brother and sister. Meanwhile, in the woods, there is Duke Signor with his men, his merry men, except for one guy, Jacques, who is melancholy, maybe because no one can pronounce his name. Orlando and Adam find Duke Signor, and after a bit of confusion, they join the merry men. Rosalind, Celia, and Touchstone, the court jester who they bring with them, also arrive in the forest, and they encounter a shepherd. And they say, "Can you sell us some food?" And the shepherd named Corin says, "I can't. I'm sorry, I'm very poor, and my master mistreats me, but he's selling his sheep farm." So they said, "Okay, we'll buy the sheep farm." So suddenly, Celia, Rosalind, and Touchstone are shepherds living in this forest. Now, this is where it gets a bit weird. Everything's going well. Why doesn't Rosalind take off the pants? Why doesn't she, okay, we're here, we're set, we got a house. Why doesn't she put a dress on, go back to being Rosalind? Especially weird since she discovers that someone is going around the forest writing terrible love poems about Rosalind and sticking them on trees. The 16th century equivalent of Facebook or Twitter. Did you read my latest tree? And then she finds it's Orlando, and she's thrilled. And then Orlando comes in, and she doesn't reveal herself. She keeps playing at being Ganymede, at being a man. Why? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. We'll go through the story. So we get this sort of weird thing where Ganymede says to Orlando, "Oh, are you the lover that's putting up these poems?" And he says, "Yes, I am the lover. I love this Rosalind." And Ganymede says, "Love, I could cure you of that." "How?" "Why don't you pretend that I'm this Rosalind? Try to seduce and woo me, and you'll see how tough it is to fall in love and what love is and how women can be fickle. Why don't you try that?" And Orlando says, "Okay." So they decide to play this weird love game where Rosalind / Ganymede / Rosalind is being wooed by Orlando. And this goes on for quite a while. Finally, things start to shift. So this is almost the bulk of the play, is this sort of weird little interactions like this. Touchstone, meanwhile, finds a shepherdess, a common woman named Audrey, and he doesn't fall in love, he falls in lust. And it's perfectly clear it's lust. He tries to fake a marriage with her, right? He says, "Oh, I've got this priest who will marry us," to try to get her in bed. And eventually that doesn't work, so he will marry her. But it's all about lust. So we get this stuff going on, and there's another couple in the woods. There's a shepherd called Silvius, who is hopelessly in love with another woman named Phoebe. Phoebe wants nothing to do with Silvius, and then Phoebe sees Ganymede, says, "Whoa, that's a pretty young man," and she sets her eyes on Ganymede. So you see the sort of tangles that are happening here, all the interactions. The resolution is pretty obvious. All Rosalind has to do is put a dress on, and everything is solved. But before that happens, the evil brother, Oliver, has been sent to find Orlando and Celia and Rosalind, and he makes his way into the woods, and he falls asleep, and he's about to be killed by a lion, and Orlando saves him. I'll just stop for a minute here. France, overrun with lions. It's like our raccoons. Orlando saves Oliver. The two reunite. All is forgiven. Oliver has a total sea change of personality. And then he sees Celia, and boom, they're in love. So we have all this stuff going on, and finally, Rosalind says, "Okay, enough. Okay, Phoebe, you love me, but I can't love you. Orlando, you want this Rosalind that you're pining for. I'll get her for you. By the way, Phoebe, if you don't marry me, could you marry Silvius?" And she says, "Okay." And then she basically goes off stage, comes back on, accompanied by a god, the god Hymen from classical mythology, the god of marriage, who apparently lives in France. And she's in a dress, and everything is solved, right? Everything is resolved. Phoebe agrees to marry Silvius. Orlando is going to marry Rosalind. Oliver is going to marry Celia, and they're going to stay in the forest because they decide they like being shepherds. Everything is good. Then something else happens. That middle brother that we never really saw shows up and says, guess what? Evil Duke Frederick was coming to get you guys with an army, but then he had a religious conversion. And now he's going to stay in the woods. So, Duke Signor, you can go back home and run the court again. And that's it. So you see what I mean? Action, weird, just calm, people talking, interacting strangely, having these love things, and then, boom, all this action at the end. And I think the structure has to do with the nature of this play. This is a pastoral play. The late, great Canadian literary critic Northrop Frye used to talk about the green world of Shakespeare's comedies. And this play gives us more green world than any other comedy. The first time we are in the forest, Duke Signor is talking to his men, and he says this: "Now, my co-mates and brothers in exile, hath not old custom made this life more sweet than that of painted pomp? Are not these woods more free from peril than the envious court? Here we feel not the penalty of Adam, the season's difference as the icy fang and churlish chiding of the winter's wind, which, when it bites and blows my body, even till I shrink from the cold, I smile and say, this is no flattery. These are counselors that feelingly persuade me what I am." So what he's arguing there is it's better in the woods. It's better to be away from the city. It's better to be away from the court. Right? And this idea, the pastoral ideal, has permeated Western culture. I mean, I think almost anyone you talk to in Vancouver would agree that going into the woods, visiting the mountains, going on a hike, going to a national park is somehow spiritually reinvigorating, is good for you. Do people agree? Being in nature is good for you, right? And we don't even think about that anymore. We use the word natural of nature to describe things. If it's natural, it's good. If it's artificial, it's bad. Natural products. Look, all natural brake fluid. Okay, bad. Grocery stores. We have a whole chain of grocery stores selling natural products. Whole Paycheck, Whole Foods. SUVs. Watch a TV commercial for an SUV? It's not stuck in traffic. It's driving through a pine forest. It's off-road. It's climbing a mountain. Right? So we just assume this, but there are a lot of cultures in the world where if you went up to someone and said, hey, I have an idea. This weekend, let's get in my big SUV, drive for 4 hours to a forest where there are mosquitoes and large mammals that want to kill us, and then we'll sleep in bags in the dirt. A lot of cultures, there would be an intervention if you suggested that, but we call it camping, which is just pretending to be homeless in the woods. Where does this come from? Well, it comes from the pastoral tradition, which is an old tradition in the Western world. It goes back to the Greeks, the Greek poet Theocritus. It goes back to the Romans, the Roman poets Virgil and Ovid. And Theocritus wrote a set of poems called the Idylls. Virgil wrote a set of poems called the Eclogues. And they celebrate rural life. They celebrate the golden world, this idea of a world before industry, before law, before we fell out of sync with nature, sort of a Garden of Eden situation. And in these poems, you have shepherds and shepherdesses who never seem to have to work with their sheep. The sheep take care of themselves somehow. So they just sort of loll around on grassy knolls, blowing on their oaten flutes and singing love songs to each other. And it's a form of escapist literature. And I just want to read you something. The most popular lyric poem of the 16th century was written by Shakespeare's colleague and perhaps collaborator, Christopher Marlowe. And it goes like this. I won't read the whole thing, but the first few verses. Come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove that valleys, groves, hills, and fields, woods, or steepy mountain yields. And we will sit upon the rocks, seeing the shepherds feed their flocks by shallow rivers, to whose falls melodious birds sing madrigals. And I will make thee beds of roses and 1,000 fragrant posies, a cap of flowers and a kirtle embroidered, all with leaves of myrtle. This is an incredibly romantic notion of country life, which we get in this play. But we also get the opposite. Shakespeare was a country boy. He was from Warwickshire, where the Forest of Arden is. So he knew what it took. So we have, that shepherd that Rosalind and Celia meet, Corin, if I can find it here, he talks about how hard life is. Says, I am shepherd to another man, and do not shear the fleeces that I graze. My master is of a churlish disposition, and little recks to find the way to heaven by doing deeds of hospitality. So he's hungry, he's poor, he's got a horrible master. We get this other side of the pastoral ideal. Duke Senior and his followers are glamping. Right? They're also slaughtering the animals in this forest. Oh, we're one with nature. Let's go kill some deer. Jacques apparently weeps over a dead deer at one point because you can't be in nature without impacting it somehow. So this idea of the pastoral, like I say, this is the most pastoral of Shakespeare's plays by far. One of the reasons that this production works so well is it's set in the 1960s. And the 1960s saw an explosion of pastoralism. The hippie movement really rejected consumerism, rejected the rat race, and said, let's get back to the land, right? Let's move to Salt Spring and raise organic goat cheese. So it makes perfect sense there. The other thing about the pastoral world and why it's effective for this play, or why it makes sense, is being in the country. I don't know if it's morally better. Personally, I don't like to go camping. I'm indoorsy. But it allows these characters to role play. At court, their roles are very, very locked. In the forest, they can experiment with identity. Duke Senior is still the Duke, but these other characters play around with things. The Duke is playing at being a forester. Orlando is playing at being a lover, posting poems on trees. And we have, of course, Jacques. Jacques is melancholy. Let's just talk about that for a second. This idea of someone being melancholy, it derives from a notion of human physiology and psychology that was prevalent through the entire Middle Ages and Renaissance. It's called the humoral or Galenic model. Galenic after the inventor of it, Galen, a 2nd century Greek doctor. And the idea is this. Within the human body, there are 4 fluids circulating: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. In a healthy body, they are all in balance. In an unhealthy body, one of them, there's too much of one or not enough of another. And this also impacts not only your health, but your psychology. If you have too much black bile, you become melancholy. Fine. In the 16th century, what you apparently got, because it's parodied in various plays, is people taking a perverse sort of pride in their humoral dispositions. Basically saying, well, I can't help it. I'm naturally choleric, or I'm sanguine, or I'm phlegmatic, or I'm melancholy. I can't help the way I am. It becomes such a sort of pretentious fashion statement that Ben Jonson, colleague of Shakespeare's, wrote 2 plays about it. Every Man in His Humor and every man out of his humor. And in these plays, you have these characters who sort of swan around declaring their humoral dispositions. That's Jacques. Yes, he is melancholy, but he also performs melancholy. He puts it in people's faces. Let's see, when he talks about melancholy here. Rosalind says, I heard you're melancholy. And Jacques can't let this go. Says, I have neither the scholar's melancholy, which is emulation, nor the musician's, which is fantastical, nor the courtier's, which is proud, nor the soldier's, which is ambitious, nor the lawyer's, which is politic, nor the lady's, which is nice, nor the lover's, which is all these, but it is a melancholy of mine own, compounded of many simples, extracted from many objects, and indeed the sundry computation of my travels, in which my often rumination wraps me in a most humorous sadness. So you see, he's playing at it, right? And he does it well. The other person who's role-playing, of course, is Rosalind, above all, dressed as a man, then being wooed as a woman while dressed as a man. Why does she do this? Why doesn't she just say, Orlando, right, and put on a dress? I think there's two reasons. First of all, by staying as this man and playing this love game, she gets to test Orlando. Orlando's mooning around, putting poems on trees. Does he really love me, or does he love the idea of being in love? And there are other characters in Shakespeare who are like that. Romeo, in the first act of Romeo and Juliet. It's not about this specific girl, it's just about being in love. I'm a lover. So she can test him. The other thing it does is it shifts power in the relationship. If you're a courtly woman like Rosalind, you're supposed to be fairly passive in the courtship game. That is, you're not allowed to be the aggressor. You'll notice in the very first act, when Rosalind first sees Orlando in the wrestling ring, they have a polite conversation, and then the sparks start to fly between them. But Rosalind, as the woman, is not allowed to continue the conversation. She can't be the aggressor. Instead, she has to walk away and say, oh, I think he called us back. All right? So it's him calling. As Ganymede, playing Rosalind, it's different. She can, and she does say, woo me. Come on, get to work. Seduce me. Come on. So she suddenly is in this position of power. And she's a little bit cynical about love. She's saying to Orlando, you're not love. You don't have it. The marks of love, a lean cheek, which you have not, a blue eye and sunken, which you have not, an unquestionable spirit, which you have not, a beard neglected, which you have not. So it goes on and saying, no, you're not a lover. This is, I know the signs of love. This isn't the real thing. So you get all these characters playing roles in this play. And so it's utterly appropriate that it's in this play that Jacques has that famous speech, all the world's a stage. Because it seems in this forest, everyone is acting some sort of role. The other thing we have to think about in terms of the role playing, and especially around Rosalind, is the question of gender and sexuality. In Shakespeare's time, all the female roles were played by boy actors. Now, how do we define a boy? Someone whose beard hasn't come in yet. All Elizabethan men grew beards. It was part of it had to do with the idea of the four humors. As a man, your body was supposed to, when you reach maturity, generate heat. And the beard was the sign of that. It's basically the smoke coming out of your face for the internal heat of your body, right? And if you don't have it, then you're obviously, not manly enough. So the boys are pre-beard. And my goodness, what a great boy actor to play Rosalind, the largest female role in Shakespeare. Anyway, so you have a boy actor playing a girl, playing Rosalind, who then dresses as a man, who then says to Orlando, treat me like a girl. Do you see the confusions here? And let's remember what we see on stage when Ganymede is saying, treat me like Rosalind, woo me, and Orlando does, what we see on stage is one man wooing another man. That's the visual. And in fact, Rosalind says at one point, "Marry me. We'll have a fake marriage." So we have a gay marriage in As You Like It. Whatever you do, do not tell Ron DeSantis about this play. So this idea of gender fluidity, which is all over the news nowadays, is not new. It appears all over the place in the Renaissance. I helped produce a play a couple of years ago called Galatea by John Lilly, which ends with two women getting married, going off stage. Apparently one of them is going to transform into a man, but we don't see that. We see another gay marriage. So there's all sorts of fluidity around these questions. Even the epilogue of this play is gender fluid. They don't do it in this production, but in Shakespeare's script, what happens is at the end of the play, we have an epilogue. Rosalind, still in character, the boy actor playing Rosalind, steps forward and addresses the audience. This is unusual. She even says it. It is not the fashion to see the lady in the epilogue. Okay? So she's still in character. And then she says, "If I were a woman, I would kiss as many of you as had beards that pleased me." Well, you know you're a boy, but you're playing a woman. Again, you get this weird sort of gender blending, gender diffusion, sort of goofing around with sexuality at this point. Coming back to the question of sexuality more specifically, there's a lot of people in this play who fall in love at first sight. Rosalind, Orlando, Oliver, and Celia. Touchstone, we don't get to see their initial thing, but it's a lust, so it probably fell for her right away, too. We even get a line in this play, "Whoever loved that loved not at first sight." And that line is stolen from Christopher Marlowe, who wrote that pastoral poem I read to you. He wrote an epic poem, or a small epic, called Hero and Leander, great erotic poem that contains that line. So Shakespeare puts that idea in there. And that poem, too, by the way, has gender sexuality blending, where you have a young man called Leander swimming the Hellespont to go to his lover, Leander, but the god Poseidon looks up and sees this naked youth swimming above him and goes up and starts tickling him. And Leander says, "No, I know, you're mistaken. I'm not a woman." And Poseidon basically says, "I know." So I don't think it's a coincidence that that's the poem that Shakespeare quotes from in this play. So sexuality, gender blending, and of course the question of love. We have different visions of love in this play. Like I said, Rosalind's can be rather cynical. At one point she says, again, if I can find it, that people lie about love. This is what she says. She says, "Oh, you think you're going to die from love. You're such a great lover." Yeah, and she says, Leander, he would have lived many a fair year, though Hero had turned none, if it had not been for a hot midsummer night. So mentions the Marlowe poem, the sexual poem, and swimming across the Hellespont. And then she says, "But these are all lies. Men have died from time to time, and worms have eaten them, but not for love." The total opposite you get from that love-struck shepherd Silvius. I don't know who the actor is that plays Silvius in this production, but I love him. And he's asked at one point, "What is love?" And he says, "It is to be made all of fantasy, all made of passion, and all made of wishes, all adoration, duty, and observance, all humbleness, all patience and impatience, all purity, all trial, all obedience, and so I am for Phoebe." So these very different notions of love in this play that sort of come into contact with each other. So to start summing up the play and talking a little bit about this production, when you're watching the play, there's a couple of big questions to think about. This one about the pastoral. The real question behind the pastoral is, what is the best environment for human beings? And people have argued, the city, the country, whatever. But is there an environment that makes people better? The founding of America, Thomas Jefferson, one of the founding fathers of America, wanted there to be no industry in the United States. Said if it's all rural and agricultural, people will be better. So we get that vision. So think about that. And you'll note at the end of the play, some people are going back to court, but some aren't. Oliver and Celia have decided this is the place for them. Jacques is not going back to court. So people are making this decision. Another big question is the question of love. How do we define it? Is it just sexual? Is it restricted to certain genders? Are there certain protocols for it? Is it, as Sylvia says, adoration? And the other big question is the nature of identity, the question of nature versus nurture. Oliver begins the play by saying, I haven't been nurtured, I haven't been given an education. So Orlando begins the play by saying, I haven't been nurtured, I haven't been given an education. And so, I'm doomed. But his nobility comes through in his actions, in the way he treats the old servant, for example. And Oliver, who has been nurtured, is a monster until he has his conversion in the woods. Now let's come to this production. As I mentioned, setting in the 1960s, stroke of genius. The play is cut. You don't get the epilogue. Some of the subplots are cut. A number of speeches are cut, and there are some changes. The dukes, Duke Frederick and Duke Signor, become duchesses. They're both performed by Jennifer Lines. If you've seen Vanier Bard, you know Jennifer Lines. She is the actress with the greatest smile in human history. And it makes perfect sense to have her play both roles. We have music. The Beatles. How about 20 songs, Mary, something like that? 23 songs by the Beatles are put in here. And it makes sense, because this is Shakespeare's most musical play. This play has more song and dance than any other play that Shakespeare wrote. So if you're going to make a musical out of a Shakespeare play, this is the one to do. And what about this question of it being the Beatles? It is impossible to make comparisons across different art forms. You might be tempted to think, okay, Lennon and McCartney were the Shakespeare of popular music. These things don't really work. But you can certainly see some analogies. Shakespeare was working in a popular form, but he pushed its boundaries. He took inherited genres, inherited ideas, inherited storylines, and he changed them and he tweaked them, and sometimes radically, to surprise and delight his audiences. The Beatles, too, started off as sort of a cover band in Liverpool doing American rock and roll and rhythm and blues, but they evolved and they started to innovate and they started to press the boundaries of what people thought was possible in popular music. The other reason why I think the Beatles work especially is they represent the 60s to a large extent. They're innovative, but so many of their 213 songs that they recorded are about love, which is perfect for this play. And compared to so many other bands from that era, their music is incredibly hopeful. Again and again, there is a sense of joy that comes out in the songs and the albums that the Beatles produced over their long careers. And if there's one thing that this play gives us, I think, is joy. Thank you. So we have about 10 minutes for questions.
Could you explain the title, As You Like It?
Well, yeah.
Where does it come from?
Well, it's sort of perfect, isn't it? That sentence, "as you like it," actually shows up in Thomas Lodge's Rosalind as a piece of dialogue, but Shakespeare grabbed it. And again, think about what's going on with the gender blending and sexuality here, right? As you like it. Am I seeing a man seducing a man, or a man seducing a girl, or am I seeing a boy actor? What is going on there? What are the levels of attraction? And as you like it, knock yourself out. whatever you want, at least while we're in this world, when we're off in the forest. Yeah. Other questions?
Hi. I was wondering if the writer of Rosalind was given any kind of credit in this play.
No, no. No, I mean, we're so used to copyright and stuff. There was no copyright back in this period, and the vast majority of plays and vast majority of Shakespeare's plays were lifted from some place, sometimes from classical sources, sometimes from other plays, from history books. This is one of the most, this is one of the few times I think where Shakespeare lifted it from something that was very recently published. So this book came out in 1590, the play staged probably around 1599. Thomas Lodge is still alive. Thomas Lodge is going to outlive Shakespeare. He doesn't die until 1625. But no, and so I would love to know what Thomas Lodge thought. Were people jealous? Because there was no copyright, were people jealous? Did you go up to theater and just say that, hello? We don't know. But again, theft was rampant. And I think if you went up to someone like Shakespeare or Marlowe and said, hey, why don't you write something totally original? Go, why? The best stories are oft told. You can lead people down a well-trod path easier than leading them into the brambles. So I'd love to know what Thomas Lodge thought, but we don't know. The questions?
In the fake marriage scene,
yeah.
Well, just before the fake marriage scene, Celia says, no, I cannot say the words.
Yeah.
And then they do say them. Now, yeah. I've read or heard or possibly heard you say that it was illegal to present a sacrament on stage.
Yeah.
Could you comment on that scene?
Yeah, no, it's a very good, well, they don't, I mean, it's not a full marriage. I mean, they say a few words. I think, first of all, the first part, though, Celia says, no, I can't do it. And I think that's a really touching moment. Celia and Rosalind are the best of friends. They're just, sisters. And I think there's this moment where Celia's like, I'm going to lose her, right? What are you doing, right? And this is before she gets to meet Oliver, and then it's different. So there's a really tender moment, I think, there. But you're right, you weren't supposed to put a sacrament on stage. Marriage in the Catholic faith is a sacrament. In the Anglican faith, it's sort of one of the only sacraments that really count are baptism and the Eucharist. But then there's these other ones that are sort of like secondary, but still, no one that I can think of put a full marriage on the stage. So what we get is this sort of truncated, playful, not complete marriage. I think that's as far as Shakespeare could push it without getting into trouble. Especially since it appears to be between two men. Yeah. Other questions?
Can you talk a little bit about how Jacques talks about the cycle of life?
Sure. Yeah. So that most famous speech in the play, of course, there are 7 ages of man. So he basically says, okay, all the world's a stage, and then, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances. And then, so we're all play acting, you say. Life is just this performance. And then he breaks the human life cycle down into 7 stages. Says we all go through these, we all play these roles, the infant, the school child, the lover, the soldier, and then leading up to this final old age and death. The last scene of all that ends this strange, eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion, sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. It ends with this very melancholy vision of human life as a series of performances leading to that last tragic one. But you know what? He's wrong. Because immediately after that, Orlando comes on stage bearing Adam, this old servant who is stuck with him. Adam gives Orlando all his money so Orlando can escape to the forest. And what we see is something entirely different. We see this care for this old man. We see this old man who's so good that he supported this young man. And so I think this speech, although it's lovely and has beautiful images in it, ultimately Jacques is wrong. People choose their roles, right? Choose what they're going to play, and some people choose better than others.
You said that this is a play where Rosalind is the female role that has the greatest amount of lines.
Yeah.
Is it by long shot, and what is the second one? And what did it do at the time? Did it have an impact?
Okay, I think the second one is probably Antony and Cleopatra. Is that right, Aaron?
Yeah, I think it's either Cleopatra or Helena in Midsummer Night's Dream.
Or,
she says a ton.
Yeah, she does get a lot. Yeah, so it's a toss-up between those two. I mean, that would be easy enough to look up. Did it have an impact? We don't know. We don't know a lot about the performance history of this play at its time. So I don't think we could say whether it had any sort of effect in one way or another. There are lots of other plays that have major female roles, like, you know, wow, this was played by a boy. One of my favorites is a dark tragedy by John Webster called The Duchess of Malfi, which has at the heart this woman, this Duchess, which is an incredible figure. Shakespeare, if there's any effect, Shakespeare opened the door maybe for other playwrights of the time to put all their eggs in the female lead basket, which they may not have done earlier than that, but you have to really look through the history of plays to see if it's this play that starts that trend. I honestly don't know. But again, I can't imagine a boy, you know, playing a role like this. It's astonishing.
Don't mind it.
When did women first appear on stage?
1660. So in 1642 we get the English Civil War. The Puritans take control of London Parliament. Eventually in 1649, King Charles I is beheaded. By the way, Charles III, who is king now, not a lucky name. The court, what's left of the court, goes to France. Charles II goes to France. And they stay there until the Restoration, which happens in 1660. And then the court comes back and they bring with them French ideas. Not lines, but ideas. Like maybe we should have women on stage. And this is when it starts. And at first, those women are treated as essentially burlesque dancers or prostitutes, because it's just such a weird innovation. But by the time you get into the 17th century, later 17th century, 18th century, women actors all over the place. So 1660 is the magic year.
Hi, you talked a lot about gender fluidity and about homosexuality and bisexuality in the play depicted, and you talked also a lot about people playing roles. How acceptable was that in open society in Elizabethan England?
Okay, this helps. Can I do this quickly? We know there are lots of records of people cross-dressing. There was even a play about a famous woman called Moll Cuthurst. It's called The Roaring Girl, who's famous in London for cross-dressing as a man. The question of sexuality was different because they define what we would say gay, bisexual, etc. differently than we do. Where we define it by a person's essence. Someone says, I am straight, I am gay, I am trisexual. I'll try anything. In Shakespeare's period, sexuality is defined by actions, what you physically did. So you could declare your love, undying love for another man, and no one would blink. If, however, you committed the sin of sodomy, you would be arrested. Right? So your emotional lives were as you like it, but your physical lives were much more restricted. Does that make sense? Okay, I've got a quick announcement for you. I just want a reminder that on November 17th and 18th at SFU Harbor Center, there's going to be a special showing of the first folio of Shakespeare, and world experts on the first folio will be giving a talk on that Friday. I will be there moderating that discussion. And on the subsequent day, there's going to be a new original play presented by Bard actors about the first folio. So November 17th and 18th, mark those in your calendars. I hope to see you there. Who wrote this play? Anyway, I hope to see you there. Enjoy as you like it. Thank you so much.